Good morning and thanks for tuning in. So a few weeks ago, I had to have our family dog Bruno put to sleep, and most of you have probably gone through that experience where you have a pet that really is more than a pet, becomes a member of the family, and when it comes time to say goodbye, you start to kind of reflect on what the pet meant to you. And so I've been thinking a lot about what Bruno meant for me. And so what you're going to get this morning is a sermon not about my dog, but involving my dog. And so this sermon will start out with a story. So let me preface it by saying this. Most of the time, I don't know what God is doing. Most of the time, I have no idea what it is that God is up to. And it usually takes hindsight. It usually takes some reflection and looking back to really begin to see, okay, so that's what God was up to. That's what you were doing. And so it's safe to say that most of the time I don't know what God is doing, how He's working. And I really didn't know what He was doing when Yasmin and I decided to first get a dog. We were very young. We'd only been married for about a year. We knew we didn't want to have kids quite yet, but we felt like we needed something that would teach us responsibility, some kind of like in-between, something in between, because we weren't ready for kids. And so we thought having a dog might be a good learning experience for us. So we were living in Mexico at the time, doing mission work. So where do you buy a dog, or where do you get a dog in Mexico? Well, this was before kind of this collective conscience or consciousness about adopting and adoption. And so we weren't looking to adopt a dog, we were going to just buy a dog. And in Mexico, the easiest place to buy a dog was at the market. And just down the street from our house, every Saturday there was this open air market, kind of like a flea market. And almost literally people would show up and just kind of set up shop and sell whatever it is they were going to sell. And so you could literally find almost anything you wanted to buy. And there was kind of this unofficial area designated for people selling animals. Birds, cats, dogs, reptiles, there was pretty much anything and everything. And so we were looking around, and there was this cardboard box on the ground with an older man sitting next to it. He had obviously come from outside of town, probably one of the ranch communities outside of the city where we lived. And in this cardboard box was a bunch of puppies, brothers and sisters, and they were all brown with a black mask because they were boxers. And then there was this other one that had these, really kind of striking white markings. And that was the dog that Yasmin said, let's get him. And so we named him Bruno. We paid 500 pesos for him, so that's like $20, $25. We took him home, we fed him, we got him his shots, played with him. He started to grow, and as he got bigger, I started to take him on walks. And he had a lot of energy. And so my understanding was that I should probably take him on a walk every single day to kind of get that energy, let him run that out, let him get rid of that energy. Well, in Mexico, it would get so hot once the sun came up that it wasn't pleasant to walk your dog once it got hot out. And so kind of what I started to do to avoid that was I would get Bruno, and we would wake up at about 6 a.m. and we would take our morning walk before the sun came up. So it was, it was a little bit light out, but it wasn't blazing hot. And so there happened to be this city park down the street from where we lived that had about a mile long loop, and there was trees and kind of gardens, and it was very lush. And that's where I would take him every single morning before the sun came up. And it was that routine and the context of the garden and, the cool of the morning, the darkness, the silence of, the city that was still asleep, that turned this really kind of ordinary daily activity into something that I would call sacred. It had gone from being ordinary to extraordinary, natural to supernatural, mundane to sacred. And the reason why is because that block of time became my hour of fellowship with God every single morning. That context became the place where I learned to walk and talk with God, where I learned to fellowship and kind of seek God in prayer. And so I realized over the course of time that I wasn't just walking Bruno, I was spending time with God. And I did that nearly every day, even after we moved from Mexico to Michigan and then Michigan to Oregon. Almost every single day, rain or shine, for 10 and a half years, until Bruno, until I had to have him put down. I did that almost every single day. And so it was kind of by complete accident that I stumbled upon the very thing that I feel like brings me closer to God, which is walking and talking to God. And that's what it did for me. After those walks, I would feel closer to God. Now, that doesn't mean that they were these deep moments of spiritual transcendence. Sometimes I didn't know what to say. Sometimes I was distracted. At other times, my feelings would overwhelm me. I would be angry, or I would be sad. I would be dealing with culture shock. But then other times, prayer just kind of, it seemed to roll off of my tongue. It seemed to come so easy. And the point was that through thick and thin, for better, for worse, I was in this relationship with God. And those moments of walking with Bruno in the park or in the woods here in Oregon were times that I was able to draw closer to God. And I think that Jesus had something very similar to that. I want us to read some verses. Starting in Matthew chapter 14, verse 23. So Matthew 14:23 says, "After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. Then flip over to Matthew 26:39. 26:39. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Mark 1, verse 35. Mark 1:35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Luke 5:15 through 16. The news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Luke 6:12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. I didn't give you any of the background or context to any of those verses. And the reality is that the context varies. Some of these times are very early in Jesus' ministry, right after he's called his first disciples. One of those times is obviously at the very end of his ministry in the Garden of Gethsemane. The point is that Jesus made this practice, this habit of going to these solitary places, whether it's a mountainside or a garden, and praying to God. Sometimes he did it seems like, before the break of day, while it was still dark outside. And so it kind of gives us this window into how Jesus drew near to God. He would pray by himself in a lonely place on a mountainside or in a garden. And it makes you wonder, why did Jesus do that? Why in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and there is in John the same kind of scene, why did Jesus consistently do this, regardless of what was taking place in his life? At the very beginning of his ministry to the very end of his life, why did Jesus consistently do this? And I think the only answer was, or could be, is that it's what made him feel closest to God. It must have been something that made him experience God's presence or feel closer to God. And so he did it on a regular basis. And so this is a really simple sermon. My encouragement to you is to find the thing, the activity, the practice, the experience, find the thing that makes you feel closer to God and do it regularly. Find what draws you closer to God. The thing that where after you've done it, you feel like in your relationship with God, you have gotten closer to Him. Find whatever that is and do it as much as you can. Do it often, like Jesus did. Do it well. Do it with intention. Really pursue it. Make a practice of it. Make it a discipline. Make it something that you do regularly. Do it when it doesn't seem like it's working. There were days where I would take Bruno on walks and I would try to talk to God, and it just didn't seem like it was working. My heart or my mind or just my body, my exhaustion wouldn't allow me to speak with God. And so I would still go through with that practice. I would still put myself in that context and expose myself to that endeavor. It wouldn't always go well, but I would still do it. So do it when it doesn't even seem to work. And there will be times where you won't feel anything. You might not feel God's presence. You might not feel closer to God. But the point is to do it like Jesus did. James says, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you." And the context of that is that has a specific context, and it's James chapter 4. And it's really, the context of that is drawing near to God in repentance, and God will draw near to you with forgiveness. But the concept of drawing near to God is true outside of that context too. When you draw near to God, He will draw near to you. And so find the thing that draws you closer to Him. And that looks different for everybody. Jesus had His method. I have my method. I've had to adapt that a little bit now that I don't have a dog. It's harder now. I have to be intentional about it. And I admit that I'm not doing it as regularly as I was. And so I have to really kind of push myself to get up and walk now. To go out and do what I used to do regularly. But it looks different for everybody. Some people feel closest to God when they pray. Some people feel closer to God when they are reading Scripture. Some feel closer to God when they're singing songs of praise and of worship. Others feel closest to God when they are spending time in fellowship with His people, with other Christians. There's not one specific way to draw nearer to God, because each of us is unique in what makes us feel closer to God. Each of us is unique in how we perceive God's presence in our lives. And so I'm not telling you what to do or how to do it. I'm just telling you to do it, because it will change your life. And that's why I'm so indebted to Bruno. Of course, he has no idea how he became the catalyst to increasing my relationship with God, to putting me in a context with a practice that was life-altering, that to this day and probably to the day that I die will be the way that I draw near to God. So my encouragement to you is to pursue His presence to the greatest of your ability, knowing that it will bring great blessings of joy and of peace and of comfort as you walk the path. So do what makes you feel closer to God. Do it well, do it often, do it when you don't feel anything. And be blessed.